right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Gigi Alsari, and I'm the Crane Fellow here at Prime Coalition, and I'll be the moderator of today's webinar. But we have lots of exciting speakers as well, so stay tuned. Very quickly for our agenda today, we'll have about a 60-minute session that's focused on, I would say, three main things. So first, Anna Goldstein from Prime Coalition and Gilman Carlson from Rho Impact will share an exciting partnership update about us launching the Crane tier, which is the next step in our Crane tools evolution. Next, we'll have Amber Gold, also from Rho Impact, who will demonstrate how the Crane tier works in a very quick demo. And then finally, we are joined by three guest speakers who will share a few thoughts about climate IMM tools and decision-making for investment teams and beyond. So as we go, I encourage you all to drop your questions in the chat throughout our discussion. We'll get to them at the end. And with that, I invite Anna and Gilman to introduce themselves and share their exciting update.
Thank you so much, Gigi. Hello, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be with you and see everyone today. My name is Anna Goldstein. I am the Chief Program Officer at Prime Coalition. Prime is a public charity nonprofit, and we empower philanthropists to advance untapped climate solutions with speed and scale. So what that means for us, we have two programming strategies. They are catalytic investing and knowledge sharing. Knowledge sharing is what brings us here today, as Prime is the developer of climate impact resources that are free for all climate investors to use in hopes of advancing our collective field forward toward prioritizing climate impact. As Chief Program Officer, I lead both our programming strategies with a wonderful virtual team on the nonprofit side, and I sit on the senior leadership team at Prime. Gilman, over to you.
Well, good morning, everybody. I am genuinely thrilled to be here and for this moment. So, kind of as a brief introduction to Rho Impact, I would just say that my team and I were genuinely inspired by the work that Prime and NYSERDA published way back in 2017, which we'll hear a little bit about in a second. But so inspired, in fact, that we raised our hands and asked how we could help back before Crane even had a name. And I think that we were and very much still are a bunch of data nerds who care very deeply about climate. And we saw something rare in this, which is a credible path to investing in climate that is backed by data. And getting here has taken years. We are standing on the shoulders of a tremendous amount of work before us, and we know that it'll continue to take a village going forward. So the speakers on this webinar are a reflection of that journey, and we are so thankful for you taking the time to be here and talk about your experiences with this as we move this forward. Given that you're going to hear more about Koi throughout this webinar, I'm going to leave it at that probably for the company introduction, and everyone can just know that we are obsessed with climate data and accelerating investments into climate solutions. So really excited to get into it.
Amazing. Okay. Thank you, Gilman, for teeing up a little bit about the history. We are really thrilled to be expanding on the partnership between Prime and Rho Impact. Looking back, for those who might be less familiar with the Crane tool, as Gilman said, Crane was co-developed by Prime and Rho back in 2020. It was the first open access tool to let everyone freely calculate forward-looking GHG impacts of early stage climate technologies. The goal here is really just to make it dead simple to calculate credible impact assessments and fast and standardized and transparent, so that we can really mobilize capital towards the most important climate solutions. We've been very gratified by the growing and engaged community around the Crane tool. Just last year, if you switch to the next slide, we saw, 6,200 plus users, 90 plus countries around the world, thousands of impact models, And we also were supporting various organizations, helping them use Crane and access the tool. So this was since 2020, 5 years of incredible progress together with Rho Impact. And also a moment to reflect and say, what's next, right? So on the next slide, you see kind of the journey, starting with that NYSERDA report in 2017, iterative tool development through 2024. Last year, the release of 2 years ago, the release of version 2 of the tool. We've been getting a lot of feedback along the way. So users' feedback was critical to that versioning update. And then one of the biggest lessons learned that we've seen is that Crane was a great starting point for people, right? Really generated momentum in helping more people come to this field. But there were limitations around the data infrastructure that this one web tool could provide. So that leads us to today and the big announcement. So to better serve users in the climate investing ecosystem, on the next slide, you'll see our big announcement is that Crane is entering its next phase as the Crane tier that's hosted on Rho Impact's Koi platform. And I will pass it back to Gilman to share more.
All right. Well, I hope you can all know that I'm very excited about this. And as that illustrates, years in the making and many more to come. So I think that this moment for us is a really kind of a moment of crossing an important threshold because at this point, everyone has access to what we see as the world's most advanced platform for forecasting climate impact. We have the most features. We have backed by years of methodological development, a rapidly expanding data lake. Oh, and it's free. And I would say that my call to action for everybody here is simple. Recognize that we can do better. The excuse for investors not taking climate impact seriously has always been that it's been too complex, too uncertain, too hard to measure, too time consuming, too expensive. And these are all really important and legitimate concerns and things that we take incredibly seriously. And that's where a lot of this work has been focused on how do we remove those barriers to entry. And I think that our view here is that with the Crane tier on Koi, those excuses largely do not hold. And it's possible now for us to invest in climate solutions. And that is a fundamental shift and why today matters. So tell your friends, tell your colleagues, we can do better and we can invest in climate solutions. And I think that that phrasing, that kind of action, that's something that's very important to us as a team. And kind of with that, I cannot wait to turn over the mic because now you get a seat in action for a demo with my colleague Amber Gold. So I'll turn over the mic.
Thank you so much, Gilman and Anna. That was a fantastic introduction. I am so excited to get to be the one to share this. So let me just share my screen and we will jump right in. So this is going to be the home page when you get into Koi. You can go to Koi.eco, and as Gilman said, it's free to sign up. We have the free Crane tier. And we have tried to build Koi with all of the knowledge that we have gotten from years and years of feedback with Crane. I promise Koi does everything that Crane does, and it does so much more. So it is a transition. I'm going to assume that most of us here are at least familiar with Crane, so I'm going to try and highlight where the similarities and where the differences are to make this transition feel a little bit more seamless. But if I'm going too fast or there are any questions, please feel free to send something in the chat, and we're always very happy to follow up. We love talking about anything in this space, and we love talking about Koi. So, all right. With that, one thing I want to really quickly highlight is this is some quick links here to get you started. We've got a lot of links to our documentation. Our documentation, if I do say so myself, is fantastic. We have tried to put so much information in there. And I'm going to try and circle back to our documentation at the end. But just jumping into Koi and playing around with things is great. But if you want a little bit more hand-holding and you want to learn more about Koi, the documentation is really the best place to start. But in terms of the app itself, you should start with the research packs. You can get to the research packs here on the side or in this tab here. And these starter research packs are really going to be roughly equivalent to the templates that you see in Crane. Now, one of the pain points that we've heard from Crane many, many, many times throughout the years is I can't find my technology. And there's really going to be one of two reasons for that. One is that Crane has over 200 models, which is a great breadth and span of technology models, but there's just a lot of models that aren't going to be represented there. Koi, on the other hand, has over 10,000 technology models. So any technology you can come up with, you are going to find a good starting point for it in Koi. Um, Now, the way that we were able to have over 10,000 models is via our Koi engine. So I really think about Koi in like three layers or three pieces. We've got the Koi app, which is going to be the interface and how you're going to interact with and view all this data. We've got the Koi engine that leverages state-of-the-art AI technology and some really good workflows that's going to help build up data that you can view in a systematic way in Koi. And then we've got our Koi data lake, which has thousands and thousands of records and pieces of data, everything from GHG intensities for both solutions and baselines. We've got tons of market data, historical market adoption trends. We've got lots of guidelines around robust, the geographies and the units, because we take units very seriously here. Um, and all of that is from very reputable, credible sources. It's all been evaluated by experts. And then our Koi engine has access to that data lake. So when we say that that we leverage AI, we do it in a very intentional way. I don't want to go on too much of a tangent, but prior to being Rho Impact, we were actually Rho AI. So we have been in the AI space for a very long time, and we know exactly when and where and how it should be used, but more importantly, how it should not be used. So we've got a lot more information on the Koi engine, but it really leverages that data lake of validated data to build up models from that data done in a very systematic with a lot of boundaries and guidelines. So a lot more information on that, but just kind of touching on how all of this data has come to be and why it is that you can trust it more than something that if you just go to an AI chat and try and build this yourself, it's going to look a lot different. But with anything where AI is involved, you want to know the models that have contributions from AI and kind of interrogate those a little bit more. And that being said, we do have tons of expert validated data as well that you can build from if you feel more confident in that. So that's one piece. The other thing in Crane is that a lot of times we found that there was a good Crane model, but users had a really tough time actually surfacing that model. So Crane used just typical keyword search. But what Koi does instead is we use vector context-based search. So if you search for something, it's actually going to look at the semantic context and try and find any models that are in a similar space. So just in case there's not an exact model, you can still find a really good proxy that you were going to have a lot of trouble finding in Crane. So let's look at an example. So let's see if I want to look at like 3D printed clothing, for example. So one thing you'll notice first is this search is going to take a lot longer than Crane, and that's because it is doing so much in the background that I could talk about forever because I'm really excited about it. But just give it a minute, it's doing its thing. And then let's look at some of the results that we find. So we've got 3D printed footwear. That's close, but not quite what I'm looking for. We've got a lot of 3D printed things in general, but then here we'll find this on-demand apparel manufacturing for reduced textile waste. So that sounds a little bit closer to maybe what I'm looking for. You can click this preview button, and that's going to give you kind of an overview of this technology without having to jump right in and then generate the report like you would have to do in Crane. So you've got the description, and then you've got the default baseline solution and market for this to see if that's going to be close, and then how many scenarios do I have available? And some of our technology models have a lot of scenarios available as well. And then one other thing to highlight is this one has been fully validated by an expert, so you can trust this data a little bit more highly than something that's completely AI generated. So let's look and see what else we have. I don't see too much else, but we have something else here that looks pretty similar, so we can also preview it. This technology is a little bit more niche. There are going to be some technologies where you're going to find tons of models that are all going to be really close. You can throw all these into a collection or bookmark them as well so that you can kind of go back to them more quickly and compare in more detail to find what matches the assumptions that I have about my technology the best. So this one here looks pretty similar. This one's going to be static. I think the other one was the SBTI aligned reduction, which fits a little bit more maybe what I'm looking for. And then this one has been partially validated by an expert, but hasn't been completely reviewed. So let's go ahead and return to that previous one. One other thing I did want to mention here. So you can see that this refers to 3D weaving, and we've got a lot of textiles and apparel. But what's so cool is that none of these words were anything that I searched for, but it still came up pretty high in the search results, which really shows you the power of the vector-based search over the keyword, where it has to be an exact match. In this space where there's so many different ways to refer to these really early stage innovative technologies. All right, so I'm going to load this up. One of the other differences between Crane and Koi is that Crane is static. So you'll find that you're kind of led through these steps with all the data, and then you generate to a static report that you then can't change. And if you want to change anything, you're going to have to go back to the inputs and back and forth. Koi feels a little bit different because this is all dynamic. So all of these calculations are done more in real time, and you have more flexibility here. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down a little bit. This is going to tell you the mechanism of impact. So this technology, it looks like it's looking at a technology such as 3D weaving that's more on-demand production, and that the primary mechanism of impact is really going to be increased sell-through. So that's something that's really important to make sure is aligned with like the same mechanism of impact of your technology. But let's assume that it is. So I'm going to scroll back up. This is the executive summary. So this is really going to be the meat and potatoes of like what most people are looking for. So we've got our annual impact here. So it looks like this technology has the potential to reduce approximately 3 tons of CO2 in 1 year. And it's going to be, in this case, in year 2036. And the annual impact is going to be the product of the unit impact and the solution scale. So the unit impact we can think of as what is the savings for replacing a single unit of this technology of the incumbent technology with our new solution. So this widget is going to look different for every technology, which is awesome because we can have it specific to the technology, and it's very flexible. So in this case, that's going to be per ton of garments. And then the solution scale is really how many of this widget am I selling? So per how many tons of garments do I believe that my company or this technology can sell? Something else I want to point out, we've got some view options here. So this is where it gets really cool. This is all done dynamic. So if you want to look at the cumulative results instead of the annual results, you can change that here. You can change the time horizon. So let's say we want to look at 2040. Very similar to Crane, the numbers that we see here are all going to be whatever the final year of the analysis is. And then Koi does all of the unit conversion for you. So let's say instead of tons, I'm really used to looking at megatons. So I want to look at megatons of garments per, or megatons of CO2 per megatons of garments. And Koi will handle all of that for you because that's one of the places that we found the most errors come from is really the unit conversion, which it's always those silly mistakes that get you. All right, so now we can dig into this analysis a little deeper. So let's say we want to look at the unit impact. You can change the tab here or just select this button. So the unit impact is going to be the baseline scenario minus the solution scenario. I think in Crane, we call this the incumbent technology, but that's really interchangeable with the baseline scenario here. If we scroll down, one of the things that's so cool about Koi that Crane does not do is it breaks down the emissions by the life cycle stages. So I think Crane has direct and indirect, but every technology will have completely flexible components to the life cycle. So and this is really good to investigate because it's also going to tell you the boundaries of what the emissions are. So here you can see that all the production stages are included, but the use phase of this is not included in the emissions that you're going to find. So that's something to really interrogate and make sure that you're on the same page and that's the same assumptions you want to have. And then you can see kind of what is the time horizon of this and how does it change or not change with time. We have additional, you can open this configurations panel, and this is where you're going to be able to select between multiple scenarios. So we also have a static scenario of here if that's something that you want to look at instead. We've got more information on kind of the details, but I'm going to stick with this SBTI aligned reduction. And then we can look at the solution scale. So some of the terminology here is a little bit different than the terminology in Crane. What we call the addressable market, I believe we refer to as the SAM in Crane or the service available market. And then what we call the market capture here is going to be the service obtainable market in Crane, I believe. But those are really interchangeable. It's the same idea, which is what is the total available market for this technology? And then what do we expect that we are actually going to be able to displace, or what's going to adopt our technology? What percentage is going to be able to adopt our technology over time? Same thing, sometimes there might be more than one addressable market. And then you can put in different market captures to kind of like look between those here. Um, and then the last thing I want to point out quickly is the data sheet. So this is going to have all of your reference and kind of more in-depth information. So if you're first coming in as a part of the Crane tier, you will probably see that this is locked. So our general philosophy has kind of been free to see and pay to use, but with the Crane tier, you have 3 free uses as well. So before you unlock something, really interrogate it, make sure that it looks like the model that you want, and then 3 should really be enough for any technology that you're wanting to look at. So what comes with unlocking a technology is going to be these references, but also all of the actions so that you can use this in any way that you want it. So we have the ability to share access. This is going to be very similar to something. Oh, so you can't share a public model. You have to share private models. So I'll jump into the private model in a second. You'll notice that on a few of these. Same thing if you try to edit it. You can't edit a public model. You'll have to create your own private model. So I'll show you how to do that. But you can't export this data. So in order to be able to edit it or share a model, you're going to need to clone and customize it. So what this does is it takes all the data and it's going to create your very own template or model for you that now you can make yours in whatever way you want. So now I will be able to go and edit this. So this is one of the cool differences, as I mentioned, between Koi and Crane. So this is all going to be your working space. And as you update anything, you will see all of the results updating in real time as well. So you can really start to play with these things and see what the effect of it is going to be. But this is all in kind of a working space until you save it. So let's say you can change the title. You can go in and let's say that I feel like my technology is actually going to be a little bit more efficient in the yarn production process. This is going to look very similar to Crane. I can go in and change these numbers. Let's say I want that to be 3 and 5, and then we can get rid of all of these. Koi again is going to do all the heavy lifting, so it will do all the interpolation. You have a lot of different interpolations available to you, or you can just put in all of your own raw data if you want it to look a little bit different. You can exclude this node instead if you'd like to, or you can keep it included, and you can save it and you can see everything update in real time. You can add new nodes, you can delete nodes, so this gives you the flexibility to change anything. Here, let's go ahead and look at the solution scale. So if you don't want to edit, you can also create something new, a new record for any of these. So let's say we want to create a new market capture. Just in the interest of time, I'm not going to fill this all out, but I did want to highlight we have an S-curve calculator here. So this is going to be identical to Crane. You can put in the same numbers and create those same curves. But similarly, you can put in your own values if you want it to look totally different. All right. So let's go ahead and save this. You'll see you can either save it as a major or minor version. Let's say it's a pretty minor change. We can save this here. It's going to take you automatically to the new version. And one of the things that Koi does really well, and we've been very fixated on, is making sure that we have really robust version management. So you can always return to a previous version of a model. So you're never going to lose any data. And then this will show you can see that I'm now the owner of this model. All right. Really quickly, I will go. You'll be able to find your model now in your private analyses. So this is where everything's going to be saved. If you share this with someone else, or someone else shares it with you, you'll find this in the shared with me. And then you've also got anything that you've unlocked for quick reference you can go back to here. Right, and then the last thing I want to show is collections. So I love collections. I could do a half an hour demo on collections by itself. There's so much here, so I'm just gonna like barely scratch the surface. But we have a lot of documentation on this as well, or if anyone's more interested, I'd love to show more. So what collections is you can put multiple analyses and then nest these within each other in any way you want. So it's really great for either pulling together a collection of things that you want to be able to view, or being able to look at kind of like a scenario analysis. So I'm going to show you a couple really quickly. Let's look at this one. So let's say you don't know the exact efficiency of your technology. So this is going to be for a methane reducing probiotic for ruminants, and we can compare what does a 30% reduction look like versus a 40% reduction versus a 15% reduction. And you can do this for the efficacy or the impact, but you could also do this for the market adoption, if you want to look at different initial markets. And then in charts, you can go here and you can see what does that time horizon look like? How does this change over time? And really compare these side by side, which you were not able to do at all in Crane, and was something that we heard over and over again that would really be useful. Another interesting um, use case of this is for, let's say you're an investment company. You can build up your whole portfolio here. So maybe you have multiple portfolios with several different companies. You can nest these collections so that you can see them at every level, and you can change what the allocation is, and then put in your own description. So this is really how you can view something at like a high level summary. You could also, let's say there's multiple markets for a single technology or different mechanisms of impact. You can now layer those together and look at them as a single company, which was again something you could never do in Crane, and something we heard over and over again, which is that I want to be able to look at these as individual pieces, but also look at them as the whole. And again, if we go to charts, you can look at what is the total emissions for the entire firm versus for the different portfolios versus side-by-side comparison of all the companies. All right, I think I have 1 minute left, so really quickly, I'm just going to go back to documentation because I want to end on this note because there's so much here. If you have any questions, this is the best place to start. We've got a lot of information on key concepts, so if you're new to this space, you can start here, or to really see like how we consider these concepts within Koi and how we think we fit within the broader space. We get a lot of questions on our data sources and inputs. We have laid out every single one of our data sources here. So if you have any questions on like the validity or where we're getting our data, you can see that here. We've got a ton of information on our Koi engine and how it is that we build up these models and what the process is and what you can trust and what you should look into further. More information on how we think about the solution classification and how different types of technologies like direct or facilitating or CDR technologies fit within Koi. Another question we get very often is what methodologies or standards are Koi aligned with, and you can see all of that information in detail here. We do have an API, so if you're looking to get bulk data because you want to integrate it in another technology or do some sort of research project, get in touch with us. That is something that we can give you access to. And then just as far as Koi itself, we have a lot of information on different use cases. So you can come in and see exactly how would I use this with this particular hat on. And then similarly, you can dig into more of the features. So how do I use collections? What are more examples, etc. So I think with that, I am exactly at time. Thank you so much for the attention. If there are any questions, sorry I didn't leave time, but you can put them in the chat with your email and I will get back to everyone. All right, and Gigi, I will pass it back to you.
Thank you so much, Amber. This was such an insightful walkthrough. I really love the example you used of 3D printed clothing. I feel like it's the perfect technology that, would match with my love for sustainability and also love for fashion and clothing. So thank you so much for sharing it. Now we saw what the next chapter for Crane looks like in practice with this Koi's AI accelerated workflow. I'd like just to share my screen once again for our next session. So what I personally really love about the shift is that the Crane tier hopes to make impact measurement, emissions impact measurement, even more decision useful both for investment teams, also for startups. And with that, I'm excited to bring 3 practitioners who sit at somewhat different points in the broader impact investing ecosystem and discuss with them the importance of impact modeling. So I'm very happy to present to you today that we're joined by Carol Moreno, Dennis Palmlin, and Jessica Lajoie. Thank you all for being here. And just before we jump in, again, I'd like to invite everyone who's here today on this webinar to drop in your questions in the chat anytime or raise your hand, and we'll take a look at the Q&A at the end of our brief discussion. So first of all, again, thank you so much for joining to our guest speakers. I'd like each of you perhaps to give us a quick intro, just sharing your name, your role, and perhaps how impact measurement shows up in your work. So if you could spend a minute or two, that would be great. Thank you. And maybe we'll start with Carol.
Thank you, Gigi. It's very nice to be here. I am Carol Moreno. I'm a director with the Investor Network at Ceres. And at Ceres, we have an Investor Network membership of 200 investors that in the aggregate are responsible for about 48 trillion of assets. And a lot of our investors are very much interested in understanding the full impact of their sustainable solutions investments. And so that's how the Crane tool and Koi come into play. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Dennis, how about you?
Dennis Pamlin, and I was asked by Mission Innovation, that was 23 of the countries with the largest innovation budgets after the Paris meeting, to when Mission Innovation was created, to see how to develop the next generation of tools to guide us in what is not reactive investment, but proactive investment. So then avoided emissions became one of the key factors in that. And also when IPCC came out with the new 1.5 report, it became clear also that we can't reduce our way out of this. We need to invest in new technologies and new solutions. So that's been my role. And also the reason I was asked was because I spent a few years in China and saw how they built up their work on renewable energy and batteries and EVs, etc. And in the US and Europe, we didn't see very much new energy and in new industries. We saw more people talk about compliance and reductions. So that was also a bit of the need. And that's why I'm really happy to be here. And I think this session should really be broadcasted live on Financial Times as a major happening in this field. Unfortunately, still in the West, we don't really understand the importance of avoided emissions.
That's such a great introduction, Dennis. And last but not least, Jessica.
Thank you, Gigi. I'm Jessica Lajoie. I work for Alberta Eco Trust. We're a charity that steward a fund and endowment with 7 other cities across Canada as part of a low carbon cities initiative by our government. So as part of that endowment, we do impact investing, primarily looking at our cities. So often our geography is quite small, but if we're doing an equity investment, early stage company, we do have to think about the broader impact. So I'm a solo practitioner on my team, so it's great to always have tools and teams of data nerds, as Gilman said, to chat with.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jessica. We'll jump into our discussion questions now. As mentioned, if any of you attendees have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll get to them. But first, I have a question for Dennis. So you've already kind of touched around this question a little bit in your introduction, but I'd like to talk about the why now question. So as you know, we're seeing more and more capital that's labeled as impact or climate. So for example, the GIN or the Global Impact Investing Network estimates that impact investing market has surpassed roughly $1.5 trillion and is growing every year. So I only imagine this entails much higher expectations for credible emissions impact measurement for both investment teams and also ventures on the other end. Why do you think forward-looking GHG impact measurement is important, especially right now? How does it actually help, climate solutions get funded in practice? And just a quick follow-up question, where do you think that emissions impact measurement is the most decision useful for investors?
Thanks a lot. That's a lot of good and very important questions. First of all, I would just like to state the obvious, that anyone who do not look at avoided emissions and forward emissions have not woken up. Because looking at reduction and GHG protocol scope 1, 2, 3, that is old. That was sort of before Paris. That's the Kyoto thinking, that We reduce our way 5% a little bit, and we try to look at inventories. That is not interesting at all, almost. We really need to shift the focus, and the kind of money we're talking about are still peanuts. The whole financial system should start looking forward and start looking at where do we have impact. And if we look at where we should look, that's obviously very much more on the startup scene. And that's why Rho Impact and these kind of tools are so important, because this is where things are really happening. If we look at what we take for granted today, electric cars, solar, sharing, video meetings, those did not exist 30 years ago. None of those companies that are leading that existed even. So what you see now in this toolbox is an opportunity to see what the next generation of solution providers are. The only thing that I think is needed also is now to take the next step, because the challenge with this current model is that we are still looking at on a product based. We need to expand that also and look on systems. We can't just look at individual garments. We need to look at how are the wardrobes affected. So look at this as being part of the future, because if you don't look at this tool and this or similar tools, you're really behind. You're stuck in the old Kyoto mindset that you think, oh, trying to look at risk and try to understand how we reduce emissions among the big polluting companies. That is not the issue. The issue today is how do we bring fantastic lives to everyone on this planet? That is the big challenge that we need to focus on. And that is where these kind of tools are absolutely a must. If you don't have that as a key priority, I don't know what you're doing. You're not really a part of the solution. You're stuck in old way of thinking, maybe because you have old ways of thinking on how you have your credibility and risk, etc. But if you want to be part of shaping tomorrow, this is what you need to do. So that's my sort of short answer. And for me, where you should use that, everywhere. Don't start to think that this is something that you should put in a certain way. You should have that in your product portfolio. You should have that to make sure that your venture capital are looking in the right directions. You should have that as indirect understanding also when you ask your questions to your large companies. How are they supporting these solutions? So you can use it on so many different levels, because the question you need to ask is, where is tomorrow born? And the tomorrow is born with the kind of solutions that this tool is trying to capture. So this is the opportunity you have to start looking forward instead of looking backwards, because I think that's a big thing that we still think about in climate is risk reductions, hard to abate sectors, etc. Looking backwards instead of saying, how do we create tomorrow and where are the tools? So that's my frustration is also, why isn't this sort of, as I said, broadcasted on Financial Times and as a major thing? Why don't we have tickers on all the sort of investment and financial trackers that bring in this kind of data? Who is avoiding the most emissions? That is what should be the key question today.
Thank you, Dennis. This is such a compelling argument, I believe, for emissions impact measurement and tools like the crane tier. I really agree with what you said. It's a great opportunity to take the next step into which technologies can scale and look into the future, into what we can do system-wide to address key issues for climate. So thank you so much for covering that. I'll jump to my next question, which is I'd like to talk a little bit more about what it takes for these impact metrics to hold up in investor workflows, because obviously for those technologies to scale, we need the capital to flow towards them. And I have a question for Carol. So to build what we just saw in the demo, the crane tier is aiming to make impact modeling more standardized and repeatable. And as we spoke previously, you and I, from both our experiences, the investor community oftentimes demand more auditable IMM approaches, but some may still find it a bit challenging to translate those impact metrics into investor decisions, especially without having the risk of overclaiming their impact. From your perspective, I wonder what does this type of improved standardization, auditability, these type of impact tools unlock for investors, and what do you think still needs to be true for emissions impact modeling for it to keep staying credible and true in the investment process?
Yes, thank you for the questions, Gigi. First, I have to say, I'm a big fan of the Crane and Koi tools, exactly because they standardize the calculation of future GHG emissions impact, and the results are auditable. So for investors, this means they can, one, quickly screen which investment opportunities have the potential for high impact, and they can focus their due diligence efforts. Two, by using a standard method and common data on baselines and models, it lets investors compare impact across very different climate technologies. And oh, by the way, all this work is done and stored on the platform, which avoids the need to create from scratch complicated manual Excel spreadsheets. Four, because the inputs are documented and auditable, it gives credibility to the numbers and promotes confidence in the parties, such as the LPs that are receiving the numbers. And five, it puts investors at, lower risk of enforcement action by regulatory agencies because all assumptions can be shared and again are auditable. With regards to your second question on how to translate the future emissions impact into a financial return number, that's a much trickier question. So about 18 months ago, we wrote a white paper on avoided emissions because our investor members needed a better way to share the emissions impact of their investments in solutions. These were solutions that caused their financed portfolio emissions to rise as the solution was being developed or constructed, but eventually would result in lower emissions once the solution was operational. So to bridge that information gap, we shared the concept of avoided emissions and the Crane tool. My background is as a fundamental bottoms-up equity analyst, so we wrote the paper to appeal to financial analysts who are not familiar with the concept. But as we spoke to our investor members, it became very clear that despite the future emissions impact, every investment, including sustainable solutions investments, need to meet the investor's financial return hurdle to be considered for inclusion in their portfolios. So the next information gap we identified was a need on how to translate avoided emissions into a financial return number. Unfortunately, I don't have the answer to this. I think it lies somewhere in carbon pricing and carbon credits. But as I understand, carbon credits require verification, and verification can only happen after the solution is operational and actively employed when we can prove or show the actual emissions avoided. So we did try to approach the emissions, to finance gap from the other direction, where we start with solutions that provide efficiencies like water or energy efficiencies and translate that into a financial number. This is how much it will cost, this is how much you can expect to save, etc. However, what we heard from our investors is that once the financial impact is known, in some cases, the deal teams or the financial analysts just don't see the urgent need to go one step further and calculate the future emissions impact. So we either get the expected emissions impact or the expected financial impact, but we don't have a bridge. So that's why if I think if there's a way to put a price on future emissions impact, it would help us all, right? To see what money is being left on the table and perhaps improve the bankability and investment in smaller solutions that have the potential for high expected GHG impact. I wish I had a better answer, but if anyone has been able to tie future emissions impact to financial return, I'd love to hear your approach. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Carol. If nobody wants to jump in, I really appreciate, by the way, what you mentioned about, the emissions impact assessment is most useful when, it's comparable between different climate technologies, easy, fast, has auditable assumptions, promotes confidence. I also love the fact that you mentioned that it reduces risks for investors. And I guess the final piece about translating those emission metrics into financial numbers is perhaps a bridge that future impact tools could develop and implement. to help these dollars flow into the most impactful climate technologies even better. So with that, I have one more question for Jessica, which is about AI use in GHG impact measurement. So Jessica, you bring a real impact measurement practitioner lens, and after seeing this AI accelerated workflow on the Crane tier hosted on Koi, I wonder what are your thoughts about, the biggest advantages of AI use for emissions impact assessment, whether it's the speed, the consistency, perhaps filling data gaps, and where should, impact investment or impact specialist teams should be a bit more cautious about AI use. Just curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks. I think the immediate advantages are pretty obvious in terms of, Carol mentioned it too, not having to juggle mountains of data manually and spreadsheets and everything else. So there's a lot there. And then to harken back to something Dennis said, these solutions are incredibly complicated. There's small tweaks to a larger system often. And the way I use, just even the chat features of AI is often to wrap my head around exactly what it is we are trying to tackle with a given solution, and are there any aspects I haven't thought about in terms of leakage and other follow-on effects, and what don't I know about this entire sector that I'm trying to usually assess in for at least a screening process with you have a pitch deck pretty quickly to say, is this something worth pursuing more or not? So I found a lot of use that way, and I can definitely see opportunities with what Crane and Koi have built together there, or have come together to offer, is that searchability piece, because that's often the first step that I'm trying to tackle is what are the other things happening in this space? What is the solution? How does it fit? So I think there's fantastic opportunity there to, as much as I love the data, the numbers are just the numbers. It's the thinking process. It's the steps that you go through that are ultimately going to tell you what's a good investment and what's going to give you that positive, that avoided GHG impact. In terms of caution, I'm sure no one wants to hear it, but I think it's exactly what Amber was showing us with all the documentation. Like, we just have to know what is going into those assumptions and what is happening in the background to the extent that we can. It's obviously complicated, but and that I struggle with gut feel, because sometimes our intuition is wrong, and we do need to learn and have ourselves challenged. So using your gut to check your AI produced numbers might not always even be the best option. But yeah, I think caution at first until, as Carol said, you get that confidence and ability to have an auditable product there it's really exciting. I think we're well on our way.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Such a great answer. And since we have 10 minutes left, I have one last question for all of our guest speakers today, which is more forward-looking as well. I wonder, what does to you good climate impact measurement looks like in the future? If you had the genie, what would you ask them to make your work easier and better? Is it more tools for impact measurement? Is it less tools but more advanced ones? Better standards, deeper community engagement or alignment, or something entirely else? Just yeah. Why don't we start with Carol?
Yeah, thank you. So I vote for fewer tools. I think what we have here with Crane and with Koi, uh, the amount of advancement that has come from from Crane to Koi is significant, and already aligns with so many of the standards that I don't think we need any more tools. I think we need more socialization of the tools and helping everyone understand exactly how it does assist in comparability, and how in fact you can audit the information behind the assumptions. So for me, it's just a matter of more socializing it a bit more. And again, just going back to that link to a financial return metric, we'll eventually get there. But I think that's one piece of the puzzle that I think would really just, make this explode positively.
Thank you, Carol. Dennis, how about you?
Well, I don't know if you can see above my head here, but after we've been working with this process, we saw quite clearly that the next step moving forward is shifting a focus or embedding the climate into a focus on human beings and how we have flourishing lives for all. That's for us, if we look at the post-SDG agenda, it's only a few years left now since the whole structure that we've been operating within will be outdated. And if we look at the global south, their focus is on flourishing lives. It's not on biodiversity, individual issues that we're working with, but really how do we bring the whole global population into that? So I think if we start looking through the lens on how does my investment actually impact people? And I think also here in the West, that will address a really big challenge for the environmental community. We've been seen as elitist. Lots of people who don't feel engaged in this, who are poor, feel we are playing in the ivory tower, playing around with metrics that they don't really care about. If we need to reboot this movement and show that we are relevant for everyone, we need to put flourishing lives for all at the center. And then show that the kind of tools that Rho Impact and others have developed are the ones at the forefront that allow us to look at that, because they look what is happening in society, not within companies, how they are improving. And that's a big challenge for the finance sector, because they've been amazing in tweaking and understanding what's going on within the companies, but they are crap in understanding what's happened in reality. So therefore, I say, for their own survival, look at Rho Impact and these crane tools, because this is the way you need to understand what is happening in society. How can you explain to the rest of society where your investment is making a change for people? Not your bottom line, not your reporting, not your accountability, but your reason for existing. Because by the end of the day, you're sitting on people's money and their future is in your hand. And you are not very good at explaining that. So your lifeline, I would say, is being described at this meeting.
Thank you, Dennis. This kind of reminds me also at Prime, we look at the human thriving assessment alongside emissions assessment. So great points. And last but not least, Jessica, how about you?
Yeah, I always say I never trust a number that doesn't come with an entire list of assumptions and and context with it. And we're also fans of saying here from one of our impact work that we've done with a consultant, no numbers without stories and no stories without numbers. So I think, Dennis, that ties nicely into what you're saying, is that the quantification is meaningless if it doesn't produce a bigger outcome, a bigger result, a higher impact. And as well, in terms of like greenwashing and these statements, you still need to back it up with with something substantial. So I'll leave it at that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Carol, Dennis, Jessica. Such great insights. This is exactly the kind of in-depth discussion we hoped for. Big takeaway for me was that, impact numbers are the most powerful when they're credible decision-making tools, not just, like you said, Jessica, numbers without any assumptions, any sort of backing to them. So I really believe that this shift to the crane tier on Koi is about making that workflow faster, more consistent, more credible, and easier to use for both investment teams as well as innovators. So we have one question on the chat, but before we end, I just wanted to say that if you haven't yet, I again encourage you all to explore the crane tool on the crane tier on Koi, and also share your feedback by sending us a quick email. We'll stay for a couple of minutes to answer one question that somebody had, but those who would like to drop out, thank you so much for joining, and I hope that you have a great rest of your week. Thank you so much for Rho Impact team as well for being here, for your partnership, our guest speakers for sharing your insights.